Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. A day later, due to my travelling schedule and Issam's sore throat, we are here to discuss the 7th round of the Cyclocross World Cup, which took place in Namur. Issam, thank you for once again being here despite your illness. Hopefully you get well soon.
I hope so. Thank you for having me.
We'll make the best of it, and I don't think that will be difficult because the racing was pretty good and I quite enjoyed the men's race. It was pretty tense for some 45 minutes. Namur, spectacular course. It was fairly easy for Namur standards, especially when the pros raced due to the sun, which dried out the course. It's I think like the third World Cup where we have dry mud when we haven't really seen that in the past, but Waterloo, Troyes, and now here Namur all were a bit muddy in the morning, but it dried out during the day. Just an interesting observation. What also was an interesting observation was that Gerben Kuipers came back from illness and then training in Spain looking feisty. He was ready to roll. He was leading the pack. He was putting down the pace. He was hammering it. But on the steep downhill towards the cobbled climb, he was leading, but his chain dropped, and that was pretty much game over for him. He would withdraw from the race later on. After that incident, we had a new race leader. The leading duo is actually what I should be talking about, because Joris Nieuwhuis was leading with his Baloise Trek teammate Pim Ronhaar. These two were pacing because the arguably top favorite, Tom Pidcock, was starting on the second or third row and was moving through the field. At the end of the second lap, Pidcock was moving pretty nicely. He was in a good position, like 5th, moving into 3rd on the off-camber, but then his chain dropped on the off-camber. It cost him a lot of time. He got sent back. He was, I think, 20-25 seconds behind the race-leading duo at that point. But Pidcock started making inroads on the leaders, where Ronhaar, meanwhile, had dropped Nieuwhuis. Pidcock went on and over Nieuwhuis, and in the 5th out of 8 laps almost closed the gap to Ronhaar, but sticked behind. The gap was like 3-4 seconds all of the time, forcing Ronhaar to go all out, but Pidcock eventually closed that gap. Going into the penultimate lap, Pidcock placed his attack on a pretty weird section, on a downhill. He surprised Ronhaar and quickly built a gap of 20 seconds. It looked to be game over, but then Pidcock had a front puncture. The gap went down to 9 seconds, but after he took a new bike, he rebuilt his lead and took the first win of the season in just his second race. Second place went to Pim Ronhaar ahead of teammate Joris Nieuwhuis. In Herentals, Issam, we were talking about a demonstration by Mathieu van der Poel. I think we saw a light version of a demonstration like that by Tom Pidcock. He looked in control, he looked strong, and where in past seasons, in like Overijse and Namur, we saw Pidcock make a lot of mistakes, he didn't really make those today. He had that chain drop, it was a bad line choice, but apart from that, we didn't really see him crash, although we have to say he was helped by the course conditions.
Yeah, but I think his technique was quite good, and like you said, apart from that chain drop, which you could slightly blame on himself, I think overall it was a very good race from his side, and it was, I think after the performance that we saw in Herentals, he was, in my opinion, the main favorite for Namur, but then you still have to do it, and I guess the way he did it was very convincing in my opinion, despite the chain drop. Never really panicked, despite the bad start. Never really panicked, and the way he was climbing there, it was spectacular. It was really good. Deserved winner, of course, and I think we got a masterclass in a different way. I would say there was it looked very good technically, especially when he did that attack on Ronhaar. The way he went through the corners, that was truly special, and just the climbing there on the cobbles as well, it looked really good. So it was nice to watch, and it was a very good race from his side. And I think that, as he said himself, it's a bit surprising to see a Pidcock with 2 races under his belt being so good. And I think it's in a way also the experience and the growth that he has from compared to last year, and getting better and better for Pidcock, and he's still so young, so the progression is there is room for that, and we see that clearly this season. It looks very good, and yeah, it was a very good race from his side.
I think it's often overlooked that Pidcock is still in a phase of his career where there are improvements. He's getting stronger. He's still, as you say, pretty young, eligible for the white jersey in the Tour de France, for instance. So Yeah, it's good to see this progression. I mean, obviously, I'm disappointed that he doesn't do Worlds, but I can understand his reasoning with such a packed summer up ahead. At the same time, I hope like if he just can keep the same form, and the same goes for Van Aert, if they feel like they could be competitive against Mathieu van der Poel without actually peaking, because I think that what Mathieu van der Poel does for Worlds is not like a full peak as he does for Roubaix or Worlds. It would be pretty exciting to see them race, but it's more of a, well, I guess I'm kind of on the copium here, just being a bit delusional in the hope that they change their mind. But as said, I can see why he doesn't do it. But it was a good race, and I look forward to some battles. I think on a course like Gavre, we should be able to see Pidcock be competitive against Van Aert, against Van der Poel. This was a good course for him today, and it was good to see him do well. But I think at the same time, Pim Ronhaar gave everything he had, came pretty close due to a mechanical and a puncture for Pidcock. But Ronhaar just maximized his result. I really don't have any remarks. And I think the same goes for Nieuwenhuis. Both just a flawless race, but they ultimately just had to respectively admit that 1 and 2 riders were better than they were on the day.
Yeah, and I don't think they have much difficulty with that, to be honest. You know, for Ronhaar, it was one of his strongest races of the season, and yeah, if Pidcock wasn't there, he was definitely going to be the clear winner. And from his side, a very good race. He opened it very well. You know, him and Nieuwenhuis did a very good job in the beginning of the race. Made good use of the time that was lost by Pidcock because of that chain that got dropped. And yeah, I think from there, Ronhaar showed that he was a little stronger than Nieuwenhuis. Nieuwenhuis that gets a course, you know, that isn't really the most suitable to him. It's not the climber in a way. Ronhaar could cope way better with the climbs and looked very good, but yeah, there was just no match today for him compared to Pidcock, and there is no shame in that. I think that for him already the result that he put in Namur was very strong, so I think that for Ronhaar a great performance, and you know, for him, if he can keep this up, I think it's going to be a great next couple of races for him.
Yeah, definitely, and he came back well from that training camp in Spain. It's always a bit of a question mark how you come back from that. His training camp is over. For Iserbyt, this weekend was just something in the middle of his training camp. I don't think he was at his best this weekend. I think 4th is a decent result, but I think it's also a sign of what's to come for Iserbyt with such a packed Christmas schedule. He is going to be consistently up there, but I think he's going to lack like overperformance. He's going to be always around that position, going to secure his leading positions in the Super Prestige and in the World Cup. He needs to be careful though, because he loses like quite some points to Ronhaar, but not as much. It's going to be less and less points that he loses to them due to Pidcock, Van Aert and Van der Poel taking the high scoring positions. Pretty much from like 4th downwards, it's like only a few points per position. At some point, it's even just 1 point per position. So that's definitely going to help Iserbyt. If Ronhaar would have won, then that would have made 10 points difference compared to that second place. So the win is super heavily rewarded here. Iserbyt should be fine in securing the Super Prestige and World Cup win, as long as he doesn't have a complete off day in any of those classifications. In the Super Prestige, he can have one. X2O Trophy will be a bit more of a battle, but if you do so many races, I think having like one real standout result is going to be super difficult. Let's look at the entire top 10, actually, before I'm going to ask you some questions, Issam. Pidcock with a win ahead of Ronhaar and Nieuwenhuis, who you said didn't really find a great course for him here. Iserbyt was 4th ahead of his teammate Michael van Toerenhout. 6th place was for Lars van der Haar. 7th Niels van der Putten. 8th Toon van der Bos. 9th Wietse Meelse, and 10th place was for Ryan Kamp, who, in case you missed it, is going to be leaving Paul Sauze on January 1st. Okay, it's some time for some questions for you. Van Toerenhout in 5th, Van der Haar in 6th. What do you think about their races? Both riders missed their start, recovered relatively well. Your takeaway?
You know, Van Toerenhout gets today a course, you know, climber course that suits him well, but I think that it showed in Namur that he's just not at the moment at a at his best level, I would say. And that has been the story for the season so far. I think that, he had one good day, and that day was the European Championships, in my opinion. I think there were some races where he was within a shot of winning, but, we got to be honest about it. It hasn't been the greatest of seasons for Van Toerenhout. And, for Van der Haar, it was, I mean, it was a decent race. If you miss the start like that, it's difficult then to get back. And for Van der Haar, it's kind of, the conditions were more, in his favor. I think that this suits him a little bit better, but it was still not a typical Van der Haar course where you can see him, really grow, take initiative and even try to go for the win. And I think, that was just not his day. So his two teammates, Ronhaar and Nieuwhuis, looked very good, but for him it is, it might be still coming. So it is for Van der Haar the long game. Maybe in the next couple of weeks we will get more races that suits him well, and then, for him it's going to be a task of maybe having a very good day where you don't have a Van der Poel and Van Aert or Pidcock, but that's definitely going to be a difficult task from now on.
Yeah, especially because the days that they aren't there are super slim. I think in every race in the Christmas period, at least one is going to be starting. So that's going to make it super tough for him to get a win. But I don't really have anything to go by but my memory. But at least in my memory, he always struggles a bit when he comes from training camp in the first weekend. And then it's going to be better a bit later. It was a fairly decent race, or, well, I wouldn't say decent, I would say slightly below average. It's not terrible on a course like Namur, which in these conditions it might suit him. I mean, last year we had different conditions and it did also suit him relatively well. He ended second there, so I don't really know how to feel about it, but he's definitely not like the worst rider on the day. I mean, Cameron Mason, this is a course that does suit him. He ended 13th. We saw Laurens Week, DNF. Gerben Kuipers, as said, also DNF. Johan Wiesure, podium last week in Val di Sol, needed to run due to a mechanical on the first lap. For those, it's a way harder race than for Van der Haar, I think, and at least have some positive point, because his comeback in the second part of the race was actually pretty good. Final rider I would like to discuss here is Ryan Kamp. He was up there in the mix for the podium positions, at the front of the race even in the first half. But then he crashed, and that kind of seemed to completely ruin his race. He couldn't really recover from that.
Well, I think Namur is definitely not a race where you want your rhythm to be, disrupted, and I think that probably played a role there. But I really felt sorry for him in a way, and I was also like, this is a bit the way Kamp can throw away such a position at the beginning of a race. Put so much effort in to get yourself in a very good position. It's a silly mistake. It's not even something that I think it shouldn't be done in a way. I mean, obviously everyone can make mistakes, but Kamp is a guy that has the tendency to do them in these positions, and it's a bit of a shame because I think that he had it looked like he had good legs to show them in Namur. But as I said, it's if you are out of your rhythm in Namur, good luck trying to get back in the rhythm. And you can see that in a way with the big names, or some of the big names that DNF'd, and also the struggles that we will see in other categories. It is a tough course, and it's definitely not easy to get around it and to finish it out.
Well, I think he also might have just been hurt. It was a pretty bad crash over the bars. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if he really has a tendency of making these mistakes in prime position. It feels to me like he's never really as far up front as he was today, but he's definitely a rider that does make quite some mistakes, and there's normally one or two that end up costing him in the race. That might be part of the reason why Paul Sauzin isn't extending his deal either, which we discussed in last week's podcast, so I'm not going to go over that again. But yeah, it's ultimately a shame for him. I think, as you say, the rhythm, but again, maybe he also just hurt himself because he did go over the bars pretty nasty on one of the most difficult sections of the course. So if there's somewhere where you're going to make a mistake, it's probably in that pit area. No, well, it's not the pit zone area, I mean, but like the lower cold pit almost. around the cobbled climb, the downhill there, the off-camber, that's the most difficult part of the course.
2 seconden. We gaan naar de trek.
Dat was ronde 1 en ook de laatste.
Then it's time for Dutch word of the week. And we've already had schuine kant this season, the off-camber. That's like perfect for Namur as well with a big off-camber. But the Dutch word of this week, Issam, is kasseien.
Something that some riders definitely love at Namur, and some riders completely hate, I would say. And it's the cobbles, the literal translation of it. And you probably are pointing to the probably more hated than loved cobble section that is a new feature at Namur for a couple of years already now. I think it was Verwekker that thought it was a good idea to add it on because the course was not tough enough. I think it's at the moment it looks like a very good feature. It's exciting on the TV, to be honest. It's a bit typical Belgium in a way, what you can see with the hill and the cobbles, and the way Pidcock was going over it was definitely very fun. But Dutch word of the week, kasseien, the cobbles.
Let's talk about the women's race then. Sarah Casasola surprisingly took the fastest start. Normally she does not have a fast start, but she was leading the pack until in the first lap she made a couple of mistakes which led to Carmen Alvarado taking the lead of the race and opening a gap on the rest. The rest, meaning the riders in second, did not include Puk Pieterse or Lucinda Brandt. Both had a bad start. Pieterse was not terribly from the start, but just didn't have a great start. And then her chain dropped early in the first lap. It took quite some time for her, like almost a lap, to move up into second. She looked to be getting underway pretty well. The gap to Alvarado up front wasn't big. It was 9 seconds according to the ticker. But then on the off-camber, her boa got loose and she needed to stop to fix that, which broke her momentum. The gap of Alvarado went up to 15 seconds. It stayed around 15 seconds. In the penultimate lap, Alvarado put in a flyer. The gap went to 30 seconds on Brandt, who was dropping Pieterse at that point. But in the final lap, the gap came down a little bit, but not enough. That win went to Carmen Alvarado, who is taking a further option on the World Cup overall win, to whatever extent that was necessary, because she's been dominating the World Cup this season. For second place, there was an interesting scrap. As I just said, Lucinda Brandt had dropped Puk Pieterse in the penultimate lap, but Pieterse didn't give up. She was hungry for that second place. She kept fighting, and on the final run-up, she closed the final gap to Brandt, pulled alongside. They jumped on their bikes at the same time. Brandt had the inside line going into the penultimate corner, was in the lead, but got surprised by Pieterse, who went with an audacious dive bomb into the final corner, which was enough for her to overtake Brandt and take second place ahead of Lucinda Brandt. I would like to start actually by talking about that battle for second, Issam, because boy, that was entertaining. This is why you do the running training. This is what you train for. You need to have that in the tank. Pieterse with that final run really closed that gap on Brandt, who isn't a bad runner. But above all, I think Brandt kind of got surprised. She should have defended that inside line going into the final corner. It's a bit, I think, a small mistake for Brandt, and not what we normally see her do. She hardly ever gets beaten by anyone in the final lap. Only Marianne Vos in sprints has been able to do so, and maybe to some extent Fem van Empel. But in this way, being overtaken in the final corner, that's not something that happens often to Brandt, who I think just didn't see that coming.
Yeah, totally surprised by that, and probably one of those moments that when you arrive at the end of the day and finally have some rest, you think about it and you're like, damn, I shouldn't have let that happen. And it's surprising in a way also from Pieterse, because I thought definitely at a certain point that was not going to be possible for Puk to get back and fight, for second against Brandt. And she proved me wrong, and I think it's encouraging, because that was something that we kind of missed from Pieterse in the last couple of races, that, it wasn't for the win, but it was still for second. And most importantly, there was still some life in Pieterse in the last lap. And that was definitely an important take for me, at least. That was good to see. And, we have seen already Brandt having very good races so far. this season, and I think that it's just continuing. And this was a course, difficult one for her in a way, but she definitely coped very well with the course, and I think maybe even surprised me a little bit. I mean, I kind of expected Alvarado to be, if she had a good form and if she was in good shape, then that was definitely going to be someone that could go for victory. And Brandt on a course like this, way better than I expected, and was very well. But yeah, that battle was great to see. It was a great battle to watch, and I just, like you said, I think that Brandt never really expected Pieterse to come back, and maybe had that same idea of the job is done in a way, and it wasn't done. Pieterse definitely wanted to go for it and went for a gap that was there, and there was nothing for Brandt to do, because after that corner it's not a long way to the finish anymore, and Brandt realized that it was a mistake, didn't really have enough in the legs to make something up, and the meters were kind of gone, so it was all done and dusted, and yeah, that was all she wrote.
Yeah, I think Brandt just got slightly surprised there, but more importantly, it was some distances behind the race winner, Alvarado. I have to say, Van Empel wasn't there, but it can't be stressed enough that Alvarado is having a really, really good season. Namur, it was her first win here. It's not really a course that normally suits her. I think in these dry conditions, it's significantly better, I would say, than when it's muddy. But still, it was a good race by her. It was a composed ride. She was in control. She was within her limits. This is just like Val di Sole, a course where if you start over pushing to come back, you're going to start making mistakes. So it was good to see the way Alvarado tackled this race. At the same time, I do think that we could have seen a more competitive race here. For the first time, I feel like Pieterse, I'm not saying she would have won, but I think if she didn't have that chain drop in the opening lap, and if she didn't unclip her boa, and it's big ifs, I think she could have been in contention for the win here. She was looking relatively good, just like Lucinda Brandt, who could have also been in the mix for the win if she had a proper start. It's not really like an excuse or anything to take credit away of what Alvarado did. It's just I'm kind of trying to relativate their performances. I think form-wise on this course, they could have matched Alvarado and we could have seen an interesting race. But for reasons that belong in the sport of cyclocross, they weren't able to do so. And that's completely fine. But I think they can both take away like a positive from this towards the rest of the season. And as said, Van Empel didn't start. She crashed on the last day of her team training camp on the road. And after Herentals, she felt bad and just decided to take some rest. We were kind of wondering like what the following steps would be for Van Empel. Now we know. It's going to be interesting to see how she recovers from this and what we're going to see in the upcoming weeks. I obviously, for the sake of Van Empel, hope that crash doesn't impact her too much. At the same time, I just hope that form-wise, we're going to have an entertaining last part of the season with nice battles and hopefully an exciting world championship between 4 or 5 riders at the front. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Alvarado took the win ahead of Pieterse and Brandt. Casasola ended 4th ahead of Inge van der Heijden, Marius Schreiber, Annemarie Worst, Leonie Bentveld, Laura Verdonschot and Helene Clausel. Issam, are there any riders you would like to pick out from the top 10 to talk about?
We mentioned it already, but the start of Casasola was definitely a very good one. A bit surprising, and from there kind of had to fight that battle of, you could maybe say, best of the rest, and did that very well. I think that if you go down the list, Van der Heijden has been, I would say, bit anonymous, but having some decent result left and right, and has been going well. Some races haven't been going as well as others, and still struggles a little bit to find some consistency this season, but has been going well. And I think for Schreiber, a good race, you have to try and make the best out of it. And it's with this course, it's a bit difficult to get through it well, and you will always have one bad lap. You will always have mistakes left and right that you can make and that can slip in, and it's so tricky. I don't think that there is a rider that can say, okay, this was from start to finish a perfect lap. So, it was a bit difficult, and same story goes for Worst, someone that has been struggling to find form, and trying to find races that where she can pick up the positives. And I think with a result like today, it wasn't the greatest of results, but it's still then something that you can say, okay, well, next race we will try and do better. So yeah, it's in my opinion, it's from the top 10, no big surprises. I think that everyone kind of fell in his place and had a decent to good race.
I would like to pick in on Schreiber. I agree she had a good race. For her also was the first race coming back from a training camp in Italy and Spain. It looked pretty good. I don't really have any remarks on her race. I just want to briefly touch upon the U23 World Cup situation. She's fighting against Bentveld for that overall win. She is 13 points behind now. She ended 2 places ahead now. That's only a gain of 2 points. So if she beats Bentveld by 2 positions every race, she's going to win the U23 World Cup. But that situation there is extremely weird due to races where there were fewer people at the start, like Dublin. Those races had a way bigger factor on it than they have now due to the way the point system works. But that's going to be something that's interesting to follow. We're only halfway through the World Cup, so there's still a few races to come and a few weeks where the differences can and probably will be made in the classification. U23 is like the only close classification that's left. A couple of riders who had a tough day. Sherin van Anrooy back from training camp with Lidl Trek on the road. 14th. Could have been better. She crashed. She said that influenced her race, but definitely a tough awakening for her, just like the very brief Boom Flamanville weekend she did. But I think there will be improvements there. This is a hard race to come back in. Manon Bakker, last week's winner, 13th. Not a course for her, but not a good weekend for her either. Fash in 11th. I'm afraid the base isn't there. She completely collapsed in the second half of the race once again. And then the queen of the riders who struggled, Zoe Backstedt, 7 minutes behind. By the time she came in, the race winner, and had already been like in the shower, taken the entire beer in, and probably just fixed everything. It was a rough day out for Zoe Backstedt. Lots of mistakes, not a good day out for her on a course that doesn't really suit her anyway. Although in these conditions, I don't know how much I can really say that, considering how well she's done in Gavere. Just a bad day out, and I don't think this is a sign of things to come for Backstedt, who, it must be said, does have some jet lag because she traveled all the way from LA where they had their training camp here, so maybe she forgot her legs, or they were left at the airport, or they were left in the stadium of the LA Lakers. They're somewhere, but they weren't in Namur. Then finally, a roundup of the results in the youth races. The U23 men had Emiel Verstringen win the race ahead of Jente Michels, and very strong ride by first year Leo Biscio, ending 3rd. Tibor Grosso, the World Cup leader, wasn't there. He is sick. The countrymen of Leo Biscio did very well, also the countrywomen, in the junior races, where they took 4 out of 6 podium places. Aubin Sparfel won the men junior race, the European champion that is, ahead of Christophe Bazant, who overtook not one rider after the run-up, but 2. He overtook Vietzi and Paul Sexas, who ended 3rd. The women's race was won by Celicia Géry, who rode a negative split during the race. She overtook Victoria Gladanova in the second part. The Slovakian ended 2nd, and Amandie Mullier ended 3rd. Then there was finally racing in Valencia in Spain, where Felipe Orts took the win ahead of Clement Venturini and Diego Ruiz Diaz. The women's race was won by Sofia Rodriguez Revere ahead of Lucia Gonzalez Blanco and Alba Ribes. That will do it here for us. Issam, thank you once again for being here. It was a nice day of racing in Namur.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Before we sign off, I would like to make one remark regarding the broadcast. I was pleasantly surprised. They had the drone out. The drone was doing long sections of the course. That was nice to see. The idea of doing like splits around the pits from Formula 1 is like interesting, but it doesn't really work here in Namur. It would have been fun if they had put it on the off camera and you can see like where do you gain time. It's something that needs tweaking, but it was fairly good. And we had live slow motion, which also was a first time seeing that in cyclocross. So I'm pleasantly surprised by that. I thought that was worth mentioning for all the time that I have given them crap for the way their broadcasters haven't changed in the past 25 years. With that said, we will be back with a weird schedule of podcasts. The Christmas period is coming up. Mol takes place on Friday, which will mean the podcast is going to come on Saturday. And then Antwerp is taking place on Saturday, but we might upload that podcast on the Monday as you are used to, although we just need to figure out how everything will work regarding Christmas. Issam, once again, thank you for your time. Hopefully your throat heals up before the most wonderful time of this season. Thanks everyone for listening, and goodbye.